Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you will never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcasts on jimmyhinton.org or findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. Okay, welcome to this week's episode. Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
Well, we have big news this week. Lots going on in the news. It's been a productive, busy week. So, this past week, we had the Southern Baptist Convention. And, in fact, our vice president spoke at the Southern Baptist Convention. And we just wanted to spend a little bit of time and just kind of encourage people and let people know what's going on. And just a continuation of last week's podcast to let people know that the tides are turning. And I think the convention this past week and what went on there is a big indicator that, there's just movement and movement in a good direction.
Right. It's extremely positive news for us all who are involved with this movement. We need to keep our guard up. We can't let our guard down now. Now wouldn't be the time.
Yeah.
Keep this rolling.
So there was, at the convention was the For Such a Time as This rally, and some of the organizers of that were our good friend and fellow advocate, Mary DeMuth. So shout out to you, Mary. Also Ashley Easter, and the two of them just, they just put this together so quickly and I think did an excellent job. Wade Burleson is another one, so shout out to you, Wade. He came down from, he's a pastor from Oklahoma, and he came down to the convention in Dallas, and he spoke out against oppression to victims of abuse and women generally. And it was a really positive rally. And I think sometimes we think of rallies as angry people out in the streets, and, they're shutting streets down and blocking traffic and setting things on fire. That was not this. I listened to some of the talks at this rally, and I just was really encouraged. What a wonderful group of people, and the message was just it was positive, it was hopeful, and it was blunt.
It was blunt. But like you said, done in a very positive way, and it's validating to those who need validation so badly. And I think that, above all, is so incredibly important.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I'm really encouraged by this is, I tend to get discouraged pretty easily, and I think you look at the burnout rate for the people that are in victim advocacy, and you have an incredibly high burnout rate. People just burn out left and right. It's why there's not many people out there doing it. Part of the reason for the burnout is you just grow weary from hearing story after story after story of people who get it wrong, and especially in the churches. And I think there's a reason people are fed up with churches, and there's a reason why people are leaving churches, and it's not just because we're competing with sports and, all these things that Christians argue. There's a lot deeper reason. And I don't even know if you're aware of this. In the churches of Christ, we have lost 72,000 people since 2015. So in just over 3 years.
I was not aware of the number.
So we've had 72,000 people. That is a mass exodus. And it's not just the churches of Christ. This is across so many different denominations. People are leaving the churches in droves, and it's not just because people, I hear all kinds of things. Well, people just don't have their priorities right, where people are, we're competing with sports. sports, or usually the fingers are pointing in the wrong direction. My thing is, if we have people leaving our local congregation, that's an indicator that something's not right and something needs to change. And I think a big reason is people are just fed up with the way the church handles or mishandles abuse.
I think people, oh, I wish I could talk. Sorry about that.
It's allergy season here in Pennsylvania.
It is. People are fed up with dishonesty above all else. Hypocrisy, dishonesty, and lies. And when we go to worship, when we go to church, we're seeking the truth. We're seeking a safe place, a place where we can get away from all the lies and the abuse of the world. And it's not been that way for a long, long time. And the more aware we are of what has happened in the world of abuse within our churches, the more discouraging I believe it is for people. And the more difficult it is for people to sit in a church environment and feel this is right.
Yeah.
So some change needs to come about within our churches, for sure,
well,
within our church leadership.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, big names don't mean much anymore, and people don't care who's causing the abuse. We have people like, Paige Patterson, Bill Cosby, Bill Clinton is another one. The beloved Bill Clinton, who could do no wrong, and he could look into the camera, and people knew he was lying, and it still didn't matter. He was on this bizarre tour last week or the week before, talking about the Me Too movement, and the dude has no credibility, and people are shouting now. They're not putting up with it anymore. And I'm really encouraged by that, because people really prided themselves in getting away with that. The big name preachers, the big name, the televangelists, the people who had the mega churches. None of that matters anymore.
The people who were worshipped as our gods have been knocked off their pedestal, finally. And it is great. That is a great indicator as to where we are moving in the world of abuse.
Well, I think the big thing that's happening is, survivors are empowered to speak up, and it doesn't matter who the person is. That's a big thing that has kept them quiet. And when you hear survivors talk, or when you speak to them, they'll tell you, like, I was afraid to take this guy's reputation down because he really did do a lot of good. And, he had started all these mega churches, and, people's lives were genuinely changed. But there was this one part of him where he was abusing me. And now that they're coming out and they're saying, hey, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you walk on water. If you're abusive, we're going to call you out on it. And I'm encouraged by that.
That's huge. I think, as we were talking previous to this podcast, we can make it very personal with your dad. That's why it was so difficult, and still is, for people to picture him as an abuser. He did do a lot of good for the church. He baptized how many people? I remember one year it seemed like there was baptism after baptism after baptism. He visited the elderly, the sick. He prayed over those who were dying. He spent time with people. So all of that is good stuff, really good stuff. But then there was the bad stuff. Which
nobody knew about except his victims.
Nobody knew about. But for a victim to speak out, the courage that it took. Because when you have a person doing all of these really wonderful things, and they are really wonderful things, who's going to believe you? But now we're to a point in this advocacy, if you want to call it that, in this mission, where there is an empowerment for sure of those who have been victimized, because they know they're going to be heard and believed finally.
Well, I think too, I was talking about burnout, and one of the things that I see that I just you grow weary of it pretty quickly. And it's these church leaders who rally around known abusers. I mean, these are people who've spent time in prison. We're not even talking about allegations of abuse. We're talking about people who have a criminal record. They've spent time in prison. You can look up their records. They're on the registry. And it's amazing how many churches invite these guys still, not only to be a part of their church, but to lead the church. And I'm mortified at this because they don't let their congregations know. And they don't tell them because they see the person in front of them. And I go back and I'm just thinking out loud right now, but I'll dub it the Larry Nassar effect, where you see this sorrowful man. He just looks so broken, and he's crying, and his head is down. He can't even bring it to himself to look up. He's so broken and remorseful over what he's done. And I love Judge Aquilina, because right when you were starting to have sympathy for Larry Nassar and you thought, oh, you're starting to feel what he's feeling, and you're feeling sorry for him. This letter comes out and she just rips him to shreds, and she's like, here's what the guy wrote me.
I love that.
And she even used the word. She said, "You're delusional, sir. You're delusional."
She's the rare person, though.
Yeah.
She is rare.
But she also had the facts in front of her, and a lot of people don't.
Right.
In their defense, they don't have the facts. Right. But the point that we want to drive home today is, don't make decisions based on what you feel about a person. Because people can make you feel good, or people can make you feel bad. And church leaders tend to make decisions based on how they feel about a person. So if a person is abrasive, they may not be an abuser. They may just be an abrasive person. Right. They may be opinionated. They may be a loudmouth. Church leaders are more prone to give them a hard time than the person who has raped children, or has beaten his wife, or has done all these horrendous things, because the guy, when face to face with the church leaders, can be this kind, compassionate, and remorseful person.
That makes you want to be forgiving towards that person. A good example is, I do work every week in our local prison. I teach on addiction and cessation, two things. Now, I know that these men who are in prison are there because they are hardcore criminals. Bottom line. But do you know, every week I have to remind myself of that, because they are polite. They are kind. They seem very genuine. They are interested.
Seem is a powerful word.
That is.
They seem genuine, and they know it. They have built this facade because they know that we react and we respond based on what people seem on the surface, and we're not going to dig any deeper.
I am sucked into it every week, and when I walk the mile out of that block up to the main building with my CO who accompanies me, he will remind me, remember, they are in prison for a reason. Because I'll often say, well, so-and-so reminds me of one of my sons, and he just, the COs will shake their heads and say, remember who you're dealing with. And I understand how church leaders get sucked into this somehow. I get it, but they need to keep their guard up. Just like that CO reminds me every week, remember, these are guys who have murdered people. These are guys who have dealt drugs to children. These are not just very kind, sweet little guys.
See, and I think, I really want to speak to the church leaders here, even though, I don't seem to be wildly popular with other church leaders. But, if there are any who are listening, I want to tell you, it's not your job to figure out how sincere somebody is whenever they're sitting in front of you. So if you have an allegation of abuse, it's not your job to investigate and to talk to that person and say, is this true? You're not an investigator. There's a very good reason why professional investigators investigate felony crimes. Keep in mind, too, that abuse of any minor is a felony offense in all 50 states. It's one of the crimes that is a felony offense in all 50 states. You're not able to make those judgment calls. You can't call somebody in when you have an allegation of abuse and say, did you do this? And then all of a sudden a guy cries, and my goodness, well, this person must have been mistaken because I would never do something like that.
Or they over-exaggerated or misunderstood what I did or what I said, that it was totally misunderstood.
And I would say the other side of that, too, is when you know that there's been a felony offense, it is your job to inform your congregation, period. You don't have that option to not tell your church. You can't say, well, my goodness, this guy spent time in prison and he was so sorry for what he's done and he's so remorseful. You don't have that option.
I think
it's not an option.
Right. I think there are people listening who are going to think, well, Jimmy, you're so hard.
Yeah, where's the grace in that?
Where is the grace? Explain that. Explain how. It is kind of the same premise as how can God be a God of mercy and also be a just God?
Well, first of all, I want to say this. I'm going to say that whatever the sex offender has told you, the one who spent time in prison, whatever they've told you, I promise you, this is as concrete as the ground that we stand on. They're lying to you. They're minimizing the abuse. They're not telling you everything. They're not telling you all of the charges. They are flat out lying to you. This has been the case 100% of the time. I have never seen an exception to this.
Now, let me interject also, as we talked previously, Jimmy, when a person reaches the point of prison for a sex abuse, you better believe they deserve being in prison. Because it is extremely hard to present the court with the proper evidence to get that person to the point of prison. Most get off with some kind of a lack of evidence. There have been locally even, we were told, men who have raped repeatedly little children but have gotten off on a little technical whatever.
Yeah, so sex abuse of a minor is very difficult to get a conviction.
Very difficult. So when a man or a woman reaches that point of prison, they're there because they did some horrendous acts against children.
So, and again, there are exceptions to the rule. So I know there might be some people saying, well, what about people who are falsely imprisoned? Does it happen? You bet it happens. Does it happen often? No, not at all. It is incredibly rare for somebody to get a false conviction for sex crimes against children. It's also very difficult to prove a case and to get a conviction. So keep that in mind. By the time somebody got in prison, they worked very hard to get there. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't, well, I got drunk and my guard came down. You're going to hear all kinds of things like this from the offender. I can write the script for what these guys will tell you. It was a misunderstanding. Here's the most common one that I hear. I pled guilty just so that I wouldn't put my family through all this horrible stuff. I didn't really do it, but I just pled guilty because the alternative was they were going to, slam me up against a wall and I was going to spend 15 years in prison for something I didn't do. And so I didn't want to put my family through that. And so I just fell on the sword, so to speak, and I just pled guilty. That's absolute nonsense. I can tell you as somebody who is able to remove myself emotionally from these situations, if somebody falsely accused me of a sex crime against a child and I was innocent, I would literally spend the rest of my life in prison rather than plead guilty to a crime I didn't do. I would dig, claw, fight. I would do everything within my power to prove my innocence. I wouldn't plead guilty. So one of the things that you have to do is you have to look at the records. and I'm not talking the sex offender registry. The sex offender registry only has what the person was convicted of. You have to actually get court records and find out what was waived. 99% of the time in a guilty plea, you have 99% of the crimes that the charges were waived. They were pled as part of the plea deal. You have sometimes hundreds of offenses that were waived. That was the case in my dad's case. He pled guilty, and he had 3 felony charges. 197 felony charges. Well, I think there were a handful of misdemeanors, but the vast majority of those, 197 of them were completely waived. You won't find them anywhere unless you actually look at the court records themselves.
I think there are a lot of people like you and I were prior to your dad's conviction. We wouldn't have known to do this. We wouldn't have had a clue of what goes on in the court system. So it's important for church leaders especially who are dealing with convicted abusers who come back to their congregations and ask for a place within leadership, let's say, for them to know, hey, I need to check out this person. I really, really need to check out this person.
And that's not optional either.
No,
this is a mandatory, and I've only had one church, only one, and I've spoken with or consulted with dozens and dozens and dozens of them. I've had one church who actually pulled up a criminal record. It was actually a female offender too, a female pedophile offender. They actually pulled court dockets, and they knew every single charge that this woman had pled down, and the charges that were waived. They knew every single charge. They knew the woman they were dealing with, and this woman came in, and she just swept them off their feet at first until they looked at her criminal record, and then they found out. We're dealing with she was a tier 3 sex offender. I mean, she was the worst of the worst. I can't remember. She may have even been an SVP, sexually violent predator. All I know is that when they pulled up her records, they were like, holy cow. They had no idea, because this woman, she was sweet. She had gone through their, it was their, introduction to the church class. She had been baptized. She was ready to volunteer. I don't think with kids, but she wanted to volunteer at the church, and they were like, this woman she's just a sweetheart.
Now I can almost feel or sense that some of our listeners are saying, shame on you, Jimmy. She paid her time. She did what she had to do. She asked for forgiveness. Done. It's a done deal.
Yeah.
Now, what are you saying to our listeners?
Okay, let me answer that because I have insight to this. Right. I actually was working with this church. So they confronted her. First of all, again, 100% of the time, she flat out lied to them. She lied to their faces about what her crimes were that she was in prison for. Flat out lied. So, they're calling me, they're interacting with me, and they're saying, how do we broach the subject? How do we talk to her? And I said, call her on her lies. She had no reason to lie to you. And it's not like she felt bad about what she did and she was ashamed. She flat out lied. And when they confronted her about it, it's not like she said, oh my gosh, what have I done? I repent in dust and ashes. She doubled and quadrupled down on it. She kept lying. And then she got mad at them because they looked up her records. And she's like, how dare you? Now, and she flipped out on them.
I'm kind of smiling because you and I have been dealing with this type of thing now for 7 years. So we know the scenario. We know kind of how this unfolds, the lies. But if you asked your dad, or if someone asked your dad today, well, John, why are you in prison? What do you think his response would be?
Well, I already know. He writes me letters from prison and tells me that he lies to people in the prison because they call them baby touchers in prison. And he said, you don't ever want to be labeled a baby toucher. So, he's kind of hinted around that, all the inmates think that he's in there for something else. And who knows? He probably tells him he's in on a drug charge or whatever. But if he were to get out, absolutely he would lie about it.
And
he's told me that.
He wrote in a letter to me when he was first put in prison how wrong it was that he was in prison, that it was my job to keep the family together because he was wrongfully put away, and how it was ruining our family and disrupting, the love that we had, and that what he did wasn't all that bad anyway.
That's right.
And, had I not known that he had raped children and
produced child pornography with them. I mean, keep in mind, too, he was producing, and I'm not going to give a lot of details because of I would have to give a major trigger warning. But let me tell you, I have some insight. And I also know that the detective who deals with sex crimes, I mean, that's what she does. She wept whenever she talked about the little girls that he had produced child pornography with. She didn't give me details,
right.
But when she started talking about it, she broke down and started crying. She said, Jimmy, it was bad. She said it was really, really bad.
That it was. But in his words, what I did wasn't all that bad anyway.
And you would believe it if you didn't know, if you didn't have access to records, if he was sitting across from you and he had just gotten out of prison. So I want to tell church leaders this. I'm telling you, this is 100% of the time. They are lying to you about what they did. Pull up their records. And I'm not talking the sex offender registry, though you do need to look that up. But actually go pull up court dockets, look at the records, find out what was waived as part of the plea deal, and then call them on it and watch how they respond.
I think that is, Jimmy, one of the most critical pieces of information you have given to date to church leaders. I really do. And I hope that those who are listening will follow through. And you don't have to be a church leader, by the way, to do this. You can, anybody can pull up that docket. And
that's a good point. A lot of people, they put the ball in the court of the church leaders, and they're like, like almost as if they're completely at the mercy of the church leaders, that they're the only ones who can make decisions in the church. Let me tell you this. We do live in a free country, and I don't care. There's nobody in that church who's above the law. So if there are people who are hiding an abuser, go online, print records, and hand them out to church members. You're probably going to get kicked out of the church for it. But on the other hand,
no,
you have the right to do that.
Not just the right, but the responsibility.
Yeah.
Not just the right. And I think we need to reiterate this over and over again. It is our responsibility to protect our children. And one of the ways we can protect them is by protecting them from abusers. So, from known abusers.
Yeah. So, all that to say, these guys, your pedophilic sex offenders, almost guaranteed, inevitably, are going to produce more victims. And how much more so if your leadership has made a conscious decision to hide that from the congregation, which is not the exception. This is the norm. I'm telling you, it is the norm. They're giving these guys an upper hand who already have the upper hand. They've given them a double upper hand by hiding that from the congregation. This should be a big deal. When the church finds out that leadership has hidden the sex offenses of felony sex offenses of these child abusers, that should be a big deal. People in the congregation need to keep the pressure on. They need to shout from the rooftops, and they need to warn other parents and let them know. That doesn't mean that, you need to stone these guys and banish them to an island somewhere. But as a parent myself, who has 3 young kids, I would like to know if there was a felony sex offender within our congregation. And if other people kept that hidden, you better believe I would fight, and I would fight hard. I would push against that, and I would let the world know that those people need removed from leadership. I think that's step number one. They should be permanently removed from leadership.
Yes. They lost that right.
That's right.
They lost that right. They lost the right to be with our children. When they became a sex offender, they have lost that right forever.
Well, and I'm saying the leaders who covered it up should be removed from leadership.
Yeah, and they should, Jimmy.
Because that's a huge deal.
It's been too often sweep it under the rug and it goes away. It doesn't go away. And that's what's incredibly encouraging about this new movement that is happening now. Speak up, speak out, be heard. It's time.
Absolutely. So we're going to leave you with the truth bomb, as always. So our truth bomb for today is never allow your feelings about an individual to override the truth. So whether good or bad, it doesn't matter how you feel about somebody who's sitting across from you. If they're abrasive, that might just mean that they have an abrasive personality. That doesn't matter. That doesn't mean they're a bad person. Excuse me. If they're kind and they're sweet and they're gentle and compassionate, that doesn't mean anything except that maybe they're good at creating a facade. Know the individual who's sitting across from you. Look at the facts, look at those objectively, and never allow your feelings about that person to override the truth. Thank you for listening to this episode, and we'll catch you next podcast. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.